Anarchists on Trial: The Prison Fate of America's First Domestic Extremists. Before we begin, understand this. This is not just a crime story. This is a true American story about fear, power, and prisons, and how belief alone was enough to lock people away forever. If you want real U.S. true crime stories that go deeper than headlines, stories they don't teach in school, make sure you subscribe now. Because once this story starts, there is no turning back. The cell door slammed shut with a sound so loud it echoed through the stone hallway. 7 men stood frozen, chains hung from their wrists. Guards watched closely, hands ready. Outside the prison walls, thousands shouted in anger, fear, and confusion. Inside, silence ruled. It was November 1887, and America was about to execute men not proven to have thrown a bomb, but accused of believing the wrong ideas. One of them whispered a prayer, another stared at the floor, a third smiled, calm, as if daring the system to finish what it started. These men were called monsters by newspapers, terrorists by politicians, enemies of the nation. But none of them had been caught planting the bomb. In just hours, 4 would be dead. 1 would take his own life in his cell, and the rest would vanish into prison history, their names burned into the fear of a young nation. This was the moment America decided how it would treat domestic extremism, not with proof, but with punishment. And this was only the end of the story. The beginning was far more dangerous. Chicago, 1 year earlier. The city was loud, crowded, and angry. Smoke rose from factory chimneys day and night. Children worked long hours, men collapsed from exhaustion. Women earned pennies for dangerous labor. The rich lived high above the streets, the poor lived inside them. Workers were tired, and they were starting to speak. Across the United States in the late 1800s, labor protests spread fast. People demanded shorter workdays and safer jobs. Most protests were peaceful, but fear followed them anyway. Then came the word that changed everything: anarchist. To many Americans, it sounded like chaos itself. Newspapers described anarchists as wild men who hated law, government, and order. Politicians warned they wanted to burn cities and destroy America from the inside. Some anarchists did believe the system was broken beyond repair. Some spoke about violence in speeches and pamphlets, but many only believed workers should be free. In Chicago, anarchist meetings grew larger. Police watched closely. Tension filled the streets. On May 4, 1886, thousands gathered at Haymarket Square. It was raining. The protest was calm. Speakers talked about police violence and unfair arrests. People listened. Some began to leave. Then, without warning, something flew through the air. A bomb exploded. Smoke, screams, panic. Police rushed forward. Shots were fired. When it ended, officers lay dead. Civilians were injured. No one could say who threw the bomb. But the city wanted answers, and fast. Police did not search for a single bomber. Instead, they searched for an idea. They raided homes, broke into meeting halls, arrested anarchists across the city. Men were taken not because of evidence, but because of words they had spoken or written. 8 anarchists were charged with murder. The problem was simple and terrifying. None of them were proven to have thrown the bomb. Some were not even at Haymarket when it exploded. But prosecutors had a new argument. They said ideas could kill, that speeches could pull the trigger, that belief itself was a crime. The trial became a performance. Jurors were chosen who feared anarchists. Newspapers printed headlines calling the men guilty before the verdict. Evidence was weak. Fear was strong.
When the jury returned its decision, the room went silent. Guilty. 7 were sentenced to death, 1 to prison. The message was clear. You did not need to commit violence to be punished for it. When the anarchists entered prison, they were treated as something new. Not just criminals, not just inmates. They were labeled permanent threats. Guards watched them day and night. Letters were read. Visits were limited. Some were kept apart from other prisoners. Officials feared they would spread their ideas like a disease. Prison was not just punishment, it was isolation. Outside the prison walls, protests erupted around the world. Europe watched closely. Writers, workers, and lawyers questioned the verdict. Some called it murder by the state. Inside the prison, the men waited. Days turned into months. Appeals failed. Hope faded. Then one morning, a guard found one of the anarchists dead in his cell. He had taken his own life using a small explosive smuggled inside. No one knew how it got there. The discovery shook the prison. If an anarchist could still act from inside a locked cell, what else were they capable of? Officials panicked. Security tightened. The remaining prisoners were moved, watched even more closely. Fear ruled the cell blocks. Finally, the execution date arrived.
4 men were hanged. 1 fainted before reaching the gallows. Another shouted words that would be repeated for generations. Their bodies were buried quickly. But the story did not end with their deaths. Instead, it spread. Across America, anarchists were now seen as enemies of the state. Police tracked meetings. New laws were discussed. Immigrants with radical beliefs were watched, arrested, and deported. Prisons changed too. Wardens created new rules for political prisoners. Isolation became common. Silence was enforced. The idea was simple. Cut the prisoner off from the world, and the idea would die with him. But it did not. Anarchist prisoners continued to write letters, even from isolation. Some smuggled messages. Some inspired others just by surviving. By the 1890s, anarchists were being arrested not for bombs, but for suspicion. A meeting, a pamphlet, a speech. Prison became a tool not just to punish crime, but to control belief. And America was learning something dangerous. It was easier to lock up an idea than to defeat it. As the years passed, the system hardened. What began with the Haymarket Anarchists became a blueprint, the first time the United States treated political belief as a prison offense. But this was only the beginning, because soon fear would grow even stronger. New attacks, new arrests, new prisoners labeled as enemies before they ever reached a courtroom. And the prisons were ready. In the next chapter, the fear spreads beyond Chicago, into federal prisons, immigrant communities, and a nation that no longer waited for proof before locking the cell door. And once the door closed, it rarely opened again. On July 23, 1892, steel magnate Henry Clay Frick lay bleeding in his office after a young anarchist named Alexander Berkman forced his way inside and pulled the trigger. Guards rushed, workers froze. Newspapers exploded with the same word they had learned to fear years earlier: anarchist. Within hours, prisons across America tightened their grip. Cells were locked, lists were checked, names were whispered between wardens. The country believed it was under attack again, not by armies, but by ideas wearing human faces. And this time, the prison system was ready. But what most Americans did not see was what happened after the headlines fade, what happened when fear followed men into cells and stayed there. Alexander Berkman did not die that day. Frick survived. Berkman was beaten, arrested, and dragged into a system that had already learned its lesson from Haymarket. He was not treated as a normal criminal. He was treated as a warning.
Berkman was sent to Western Penitentiary in Pennsylvania. From the moment he arrived, guards watched him closely. Letters were delayed or blocked. Conversations were cut short. He was moved often, never allowed to settle. Officials feared he would inspire others. They believed anarchism could spread through walls. So, they built higher ones. Solitary confinement became a weapon. Berkman spent long periods alone, staring at stone, listening to footsteps that never stopped. Silence was enforced. Time blurred. Days lost meaning. This was not just punishment, it was control. Across the country, other anarchists felt the change. Police raided meeting halls. Immigrants were questioned at ports. Prison records began to include political beliefs alongside crimes. Anarchism was no longer just an idea, it was a risk category. Emma Goldman, one of the most well-known anarchists of the time, was arrested again and again in the 1890s, sometimes for speeches, sometimes for inciting unrest, sometimes for simply being present. She was jailed multiple times, questioned, released, then arrested again. The message was clear. You may walk free today, but we are watching. Prisons adjusted their rules quietly. Political inmates were separated from others. Guards were trained to listen, not just watch. Reading materials were restricted. Writing was controlled.
Wardens believed they were protecting the nation, but inside the cells, the pressure built. Many anarchists were immigrants who barely spoke English. Prison became a place of confusion and fear. Some were held without clear charges. Others waited months for trials that went nowhere. Families outside had no answers. Inside, men broke down. Some cried in silence, some raged, some stopped speaking altogether. A few resisted. They refused food, they refused work, they refused silence. Punishments followed quickly. Isolation, darkness, cold cells. The prison system learned something important during this time. It learned that fear worked best when it was quiet. No public executions, no large trials, just walls. In 1894, another shock hit the nation. The Pullman strike. Railroads stopped. Workers protested. Violence followed. Federal troops were sent in. Again, anarchists were blamed. Dozens were arrested. Some were guilty of crimes. Many were not, but prisons filled anyway. The belief was simple. Better to lock them up than to wait. Inside jails, guards now spoke openly about politicals. They warned each other. They shared names. Files grew thicker. Some prisoners were never accused of violence at all. Their crime was association, a meeting, a friend, a pamphlet. And once labeled, it never went away. Even after release, former anarchist prisoners were followed. Employers were warned. Landlords were pressured. Freedom became fragile. Still, the ideas survived. In cells, prisoners whispered through walls. They tapped codes. They memorized speeches so paper could not be taken. Isolation failed to erase belief. This terrified officials more than bombs ever had, because prisons were supposed to end threats, not grow them. By the late 1990s, federal authorities began discussing stronger laws. Deportation was considered, citizenship questioned. Prisons were no longer enough. The country stood at a dangerous edge. Then, inside a quiet prison corridor, a guard found something unexpected. Hidden writing scratched into the wall of a solitary cell. Words about freedom, about resistance, about surviving the system. The prisoner who wrote them had been silent for months. If one man alone could still fight back, what would happen when the next crisis came? Because America's fear was growing, and soon it would face its greatest test yet, one that would push the prison system beyond anything it had done before. Pause for a second. What you just heard really happened in the United States. No fiction, no exaggeration. And if this story has already made you think differently about crime, prisons, or power, then you're in the right place. Subscribe to the channel for more real American true crime stories from inside prison walls,
from forgotten courtrooms, and from moments that changed history forever. Now, let's continue. The prison bells rang before sunrise. Guards moved faster than usual, boots striking stone in sharp rhythm. Orders had come down in the night. Doors stayed locked, letters were stopped, visits were canceled without explanation. Something had changed. Across America in the late 1990s, a quiet decision was taking shape, one that would turn prisons into tools of national defense. The fear that began at Haymarket had not faded. It had matured, hardened, learned, and now it was ready to act. But the men behind bars felt it first. In federal and state prisons, anarchist inmates were moved without warning. Some were sent far from cities, others were placed deep inside isolation wings. Wardens spoke of preventive control, a new idea that did not require a new crime. You did not need to do something wrong. You only needed to be considered dangerous. Prison records changed. Where once they listed theft, assault, or fraud, new notes appeared in margins: political, radical, anarchist. Those words followed inmates everywhere.
A man could finish his sentence and walk out, but the label stayed. Police watched. Employers refused work. Landlords turned them away. Freedom existed only on paper. Inside prisons, the pressure grew heavier. Solitary confinement was extended. Weeks turned into months. Silence rules were enforced strictly. Guards punished whispers. Even eye contact became risky. Officials believed they were breaking movements apart. Instead, they were creating legends. Some prisoners became symbols to those outside. Stories spread of men who refused to speak, who endured isolation without begging. These stories traveled faster than any pamphlet. And fear returned, this time inside the system itself. What if prison was not stopping extremism? What if it was sharpening it? By 1898, the United States was changing fast. Cities grew, immigration increased, labor unrest continued. The Spanish-American War brought new confidence and new anxiety. Leaders worried about enemies within. Meetings were monitored, mail was read, informants filled prisons and neighborhoods. Anarchists were no longer treated as individuals, they were treated as a group threat. Prisons became laboratories. Wardens tested control methods quietly. Lights left on all night, meals reduced, exercise limited, reading material restricted. The goal was simple: break the will. But for some inmates, the will bent without breaking. Alexander Berkman, still imprisoned, survived years of isolation. Others, like him, learned to endure, to wait, to watch. Officials noticed something troubling. The most controlled prisoners were often the calmest. Silence did not mean surrender. Outside the walls, public fear grew again with every rumor. Newspapers warned of plots. Politicians demanded action. The word terror appeared more often, even if the crimes did not. Anarchism became a shadow, hard to define, impossible to fully destroy. Immigrant communities felt the weight of it most. Men were arrested during sweeps and held without clear charges. Some were released, others disappeared into the system. Families asked questions, officials gave none. Prison gates closed, and inside, inmates learned a lesson America had not yet learned. Once the state decides you're dangerous, innocence does not matter. By the end of the decade, something new happened. Authorities stopped talking about trials, they talked about removal. Deportation laws were discussed openly. Citizenship was questioned. Belief itself was treated as a reason to erase someone from the nation. Prison had become step one. This shift marked a turning point. The justice system was no longer reacting to crime, it was predicting it. And predictions are never exact. Inmates sensed it, guards sensed it. Everyone felt the tension tightening,
like a rope pulled too far. Then whispers began to spread about a man watching from outside the walls, someone shaped by prison stories, angered by injustice, and willing to act. Officials dismissed it at first. They had learned to fear ideas, not individuals. That mistake would cost them dearly. As the 1800s closed, prisons stood ready, hardened by years of fear-driven policy. Files were thick, cells were prepared. The system believed it had control. But control is fragile, because belief does not die in darkness. It waits.
And soon, America would face a moment that would prove whether prisons could truly stop extremism or only delay its explosion. That moment was closer than anyone realized. And when it arrived, the sound would echo far beyond prison walls. The sound of the gunshot did not echo inside a prison. It echoed across the nation. On September 6, 1901, President William McKinley stood smiling at a public event in Buffalo, New York. People lined up to shake his hand. The mood was calm, safe, hopeful. Then, a young man stepped forward. His name was Leon Czolgosz. He fired twice. McKinley collapsed. America froze. And in that moment, everything the nation feared about anarchists became real. When police grabbed Czolgosz, he did not fight. He did not run. He stood still, almost calm. In his pocket were anarchist writings. In his mind were years of anger, isolation, and belief that the system could only be changed through violence. McKinley died days later. The country erupted. This was no longer a theory, no longer fear based on speeches or pamphlets. This was assassination, and prisons would play a final role. Czolgosz was rushed through the justice system. His trial was fast. His guilt was never in doubt. He was sentenced to death and sent to Auburn prison. There was no debate this time, no protests, no international outrage, only certainty. Inside Auburn, Czolgosz was isolated completely. Guards did not speak to him unless required. His cell was bare. Silence surrounded him. The system did not want another martyr. They wanted an ending. On October 29, 1901, Czolgosz was executed by electric chair. The punishment was swift, final, cold. But the damage had already been done. After McKinley's death, America crossed a line it would never uncross. Anarchists were no longer just radicals. They were enemies. Prisons changed overnight. Federal laws expanded. Deportation of suspected anarchists became official policy. Immigrants were screened for beliefs. Meetings were shut down before they began. The prison system was no longer just about crime. It was about prevention. Men and women were arrested not for what they did, but for what they might believe. Cells filled quietly. Records grew thicker. Labels followed people for life. Anarchists from the 1880s had warned that fear would destroy justice. Now the nation believed fear was justice. Prisons became permanent holding spaces for the unwanted. Political inmates disappeared into long sentences. Isolation became normal. Silence became policy. What began at Haymarket had reached its final form. Inside the prisons, something strange happened. Violence decreased, but anger did not. The system had succeeded in one way. It had removed the threat from public view, but it had failed in another. It never healed the reason the threat existed. Former inmates released years later spoke of broken minds, lost time, and lives that never restarted. Some abandoned anarchism, others carried it quietly, like a scar. Prisons had not erased belief, they had buried it, and buried things have a way of returning. By the early 1900s, the term domestic extremism did not yet exist, but the system to fight it did. Surveillance, isolation, preventive detention, deportation, all born inside prison walls. The anarchists of the 19th century became the blueprint. Their trials showed the state how to move faster than proof. Their prison sentences taught the system how to control belief without killing it publicly.
America believed it had learned its lesson, but history would repeat itself again and again under different names: radicals, communists, terrorists, different labels, same cells. As the prison gates closed on the last anarchist of the era, the country moved forward, convinced it was safer. But safety came at a cost. Justice became flexible, fear became permanent, and prisons became something more than punishment. They became power.
The fate of America's first domestic extremists was sealed behind stone walls, but their legacy never left them. It lives on every time belief is treated as a crime, every time fear writes the sentence before the trial, and every time a cell door closes, not because of what was done, but because of what might be believed. The sound of that door still echoes, and it always will. The prison doors closed, the executions ended, the headlines faded, but the system that was created in fear never disappeared. If this story moved you, shocked you, or made you question justice itself, then stay with this channel. Subscribe now for more true U.S. crime stories, real cases, real prisons, real consequences. Because the past isn't buried, it's waiting to be remembered. And the next story is already darker.